Number 1.
Number 2.
Number 3.
Number 4.
Number 5.
Number 6.
If I mentioned a date in 2009, June 25th, would you know what had happened on that day? Because according to the Global Language Monitor, an Austin-based company that analyzes media coverage, the event that occurred on that day is the second most often cited news story of the 21st century, second only to the election of Barack Obama as President of the United States. It's a more popular topic of internet discussion than the war in Iraq, Hurricane Katrina, or even the 9/11 terrorist attacks. I'm speaking, of course, of the death of pop icon Michael Jackson. When the story first broke, few people had heard of the drug responsible for Jackson's death, propofol, and even fewer people had heard of the man who, on November 7th of 2011, was convicted of causing Jackson's death, Dr. Conrad Murray. When Jackson first approached Murray with the offer to be his private physician, Murray referred to it as the opportunity of a lifetime, but in the end, it destroyed his life. In this presentation, I will offer a brief overview of the Grenada natives' journey through the Los Angeles legal system. From being charged with Jackson's death in February of 2010 to his trial beginning in September of 2011. The prosecution asserted that it was Murray who was responsible for Jackson's death, and Murray defended himself against these charges. We'll discuss the guilty verdict, what exactly it means to be guilty of involuntary manslaughter, and also what this means for Murray's sentencing hearing scheduled for later this month. Finally, we'll put the trial into context by discussing reactions from various segments of the population to the guilty verdict. Let's start off going over the trial. Murray was charged in Michael Jackson's death in February of 2010, but it wasn't until over 18 months later that his trial actually began. Of September 27th of 2011, in the courtroom of Judge Michael Pastor, the prosecution and defense began squaring off over who exactly was to blame for Michael Jackson's death. The prosecution team, led by Deputy DA David Walgren, presented evidence that it was Murray who provided the propofol that ultimately led to Michael Jackson's death. By Dr. Murray's own admission, he had administered propofol to Jackson to help treat his insomnia. Now, propofol is a powerful anesthetic that's under normal circumstances only used in hospitals in preparation for surgery. And equipment necessary to monitor someone under the influence of propofol was not in use in the Jackson home. The prosecution also presented evidence that after administering propofol to Jackson, Murray left him unattended. The manufacturer of propofol, AstraZeneca plc, states that patients under the influence of propofol should be continuously monitored. To help support this point, the prosecution showed Dr. Murray's cell phone records detailing the various calls he made while Jackson lay unconscious. According to the defense team, led by Ed Chernoff, it was Michael Jackson who was responsible for his own death. Dr. Murray only administered propofol to Jackson to help wean him off of it, as he was already addicted to this substance long before Murray came to treat him. They also contended that Jackson was addicted to the painkiller Demerol, and it was withdrawals from this substance that led to his insomnia, for which he was administered propofol in the first place. They also say that Murray only gave Jackson a minimal dosage of propofol, and this 25 milligram dosage was not sufficient to cause the singer's death. Jackson must have injected more propofol after Murray left the room. In the next phase of the trial, the case moved to the jury. After 22 days of testimony, on November the 4th, the trial was handed over to the jury. As reported by USAtoday.com, they deliberated for less than 9 hours. The question before them was, had the prosecution proven that Dr. Murray was guilty of involuntary manslaughter, meaning Jackson was killed during the commission of a non-felony illegal act, or during the commission of a high-risk legal act in which proper precautions were not taken? Their answer to these questions was yes, and on November the 7th, 2011, they returned a verdict of guilty to the courtroom. Dr. Murray's sentencing hearing is scheduled for later this month on the 29th, and he could receive anywhere from probation up to 4 years in prison. Finally, let's put the trial in context by going over various reactions to the verdict. Jackson's family, for the most part, is happy with the verdict. His parents, Joe and Catherine, stated that while nothing can bring their son back, justice has been served. Jackson's sister LaToya made use of the popular social medium Twitter to share her cry of victory with the whole world. Now, various prominent public figures have also weighed in on the verdict. Al Sharpton, the well-known community rights activist, said that he has mixed emotions that Murray was not charged with a more serious crime, but he's happy that the jury did not blame Michael for his own death. Prominent British journalist Piers Morgan, and star of his own CNN show, said that while Murray did not intentionally kill Jackson, it was through his negligence that his death occurred. Unsurprisingly, Jackson's fans were overjoyed with the verdict. There was horn honking and celebrating, and the excitement proved too much for one fan who fainted and had to be taken away in an ambulance. And what of the general public, of you and of me? Well, according to HLN, a CNN spinoff that offered continuous coverage of the trial, our reaction was mixed. At the beginning, their viewership was only up by 2%, but by the end of the trial, it had risen up by 98%, showing that in the end, we did care about the outcome. Let me conclude by reminding you of the several stops Dr. Murray has made on his trip through the Los Angeles legal system. From being charged with Michael Jackson's death in February of 2010 to his trial in September of 2011. The prosecution contended that Jackson's death was his fault, and Murray defended himself against these accusations. We discussed the guilty verdict, what exactly that verdict meant for his sentencing, and finally, we put the trial in context by discussing the reactions of various segments of the population. What the future has in store for Dr. Murray is uncertain, but his trial's place in history is not. Do I have any questions?
Yes. I heard that Conrad Murray was the one that ordered the propofol. How much did he end up ordering?
He had actually ordered 4 gallons of propofol, and that's enough to administer 58,000 of the maximum dosage.
Wow, really?
How did Conrad Murray and Michael Jackson meet?
Well, they met while Michael Jackson was in Los Angeles with his children, and he contacted a cardiologist to treat one of his children, and that cardiologist was Dr. Murray.
You said they'd mentioned the cell phone records in the court case. So who was he talking to?
He was actually talking to several of his mistresses.
Numbers.
Number 1.
Number 2?
Number 3.
Number 4.
Number 5.
Number 6.